First off, thank you so much for being here for our program supporting survivors through the holidays. My name is Caroline Dado, pronouns she, hers, and I am the Community Engagement and Prevention Coordinator with Harley House. And I'll be working with my other coworker and coordinator, Allie, who will introduce herself in a second. Let's see, did I miss anything? Oh, a little just like Zoom instructions. Go ahead and put yourself on mute unless you would like, to speak up about something that we talked about, or you have a question. You can find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Same thing if you'd like to turn off your video, like we just talked about. And then if you go, depending on how big your Zoom screen is, you'll see chat at the bottom, or you can go to more and then chat. And you can, put questions in there as well. Allie's going to be looking through the chat, so feel free to ask there. And we'll definitely get your questions answered. And then you can also raise your hand by going to the little reactions button and then pressing raise your hand if you have a question and would like to speak and don't feel comfortable interrupting. Totally up to you. And now, oh, yes, Allie.
I was just showing how to do it.
Thank you. Well, then I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mouse. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight. We're so glad you joined us. My name is Harley Albrecht, and I am the other Community Engagement and Prevention Coordinator.
Wonderful. So just before we move into the presentation tonight, this conversation might be difficult to hear and talk about. So if at any point during the presentation you feel overwhelmed or have any intense emotions come up, please feel free to log off, take a break, or turn off your camera. And our 24-hour hotline number is listed at the bottom right-hand corner of each slide. So feel free to call and speak to somebody at any point. And then Allie, do me a favor, your hand is still raised. Would you mind lowering it? Thank you. Okay, just a little bit of a breakdown for today's presentation or program. We're going to talk about who Harley House is, who and how we support survivors. We're going to go over key definitions part of it, we're going to talk about how supporters can support survivors, and then talk about how supporters may also experience some trauma reactions as well, also known as vicarious trauma. And then lastly, we're going to talk through some scenarios and talk about how supporters can help these survivors that we put in the scenarios. And then lastly, before you move on, thanks, Allie. So we're going to try out a new feature tonight called Mentimeter. We have not used it before, so I'm hoping it goes smoothly. But if there's any questions or issues that come up, again, please feel free to take yourself off mute and just ask or put it in the chat box. But there's two ways you can get to this interactive component. You can first take your phone and scan the QR code by attempting to take a photo of the QR code, and then there should be a little link that comes up on the top that says menti.com, and you could go ahead and click that. And then you should be able to see today's presentation on your phone. If that doesn't work, you can go to the chat box and click on the link that is in the chat box. It should say www.menti.com. And then same thing, you'll be able to see our presentation just on your computer screen or your phone, whatever you're logged into tonight. So go ahead and give me a thumbs up or a hand raised or a good reaction if you are there with us. All right, we've got Jen's with us. Aggie's with us, Nikki's with us, wonderful. Any questions about that? No, okay, then let's keep going. The next slide is interactive, so that's why it's so important. Okay, so go ahead and press next until you see this screen right here. We're gonna do a little bit of a temperature check is what I like to call it. We're just gonna get a feel of how everybody is showing up today. So if you know The Office, this is Michael Scott. He is the main character of The Office, and he has all these funny little quirky quotes he says throughout the TV series. So do me a favor, click on the photo or just touch the photo that you just feel most aligned with today, and then press submit. No wrong answers, no judgment. Let's see, I am beautiful. Ooh, I love that one. That's fantastic. Away from my responsibilities, that as well. Thankfully, rough patch, so please keep this on handy, whether it's on your phone or on your laptop. And then I believe that's everyone, so we can continue. Great, so now we're just going to talk about Harley House. So the mission of Harley House is to end intimate partner violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and human trafficking, and to provide survivors with safety, shelter, and support services. Harley House is a nonprofit organization located in Frederick, Maryland, that was created in 1979 after a local group of women recognized a need for emergency housing for women who were victims of domestic violence. Since then, Harley House has expanded to become Frederick's only service center for all victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and human trafficking. And we provide free services for all individuals, all survivors, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, anything of that nature. And while we still have an emergency shelter, we also have a 24-hour hotline, which I mentioned on the previous slide. And again, that can be found at the bottom right-hand corner of every slide. We also have crisis intervention appointments, counseling sessions, legal services, safe hospital accompaniment, an intervention program for perpetrators of violence, and education and prevention programs, which you are all a part of today. Now we're gonna do another Mentimeter interactive component. So like I said, go ahead and get that out. And go ahead and click until you see this slide on whatever it is, your phone, your laptop. And go ahead and put in just a couple of words of what intimate partner violence means to you or how you would define it. And if you're having trouble thinking about it or getting started, I can just ask a couple of questions to get the gears turning. But so who do you believe this abuse occurs between? And what forms of violence do you believe occur in intimate partner violence situations? And then also, if you're not sure, it's totally okay. And you could just type in, I don't know, but I'm ready to learn. And then for our new guest that just came in today, thank you. So that you can get to this interactive component, I'm putting in a link in the chat box. Go ahead and click on that link, and then you'll be able to come up to this slide and answer the question. Seeing betrayal, Power and control. Great. I'm seeing anyone, definitely. So intimate partner violence can happen to anyone, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, their ability. Vulnerable individuals, oftentimes abusers may take the vulnerabilities of a survivor and try to use them against that person. Happens behind closed doors. Maybe the perpetrator or the abuser acts really happy and jolly and like a really good person to their friends or other family members. But when it comes to that intimate partner violence scenario, maybe they are, what would suggest not a good person and not treating that person as they should. Loss of trust. These are all amazing answers. I'm so glad this is working out. Thank you for participating. Okay, now let's move on. Okay, so we're going to talk about domestic violence versus intimate partner violence and why we're going to be using intimate partner violence during the rest of this presentation. So domestic violence is more commonplace language, but this also has some downsides to it, because when many people hear the term domestic violence, they immediately think of a married woman being abused by their husband. So and that's not necessarily true for all individuals, but oftentimes that is what it does, what it invokes in somebody's head. So this term can reinforce the idea that only women can be victims and that only straight cisgender people experience intimate partner violence. And by cisgender, I mean individuals whose gender expression matches the sex assigned to them at birth. Domestic violence also implies that the violence is occurring between people who live in the same household. And that's not always the case. When talking about intimate partner violence, it's a more expansive, inclusive term that better reflects the reality of what this violence entails, and that it can occur between romantic partners who may or may not live together. They may or may not be married. They may have been together for one night, or they may be married for 50 years. Intimate partner violence can still occur in those situations. And just like somebody said in the previous slide, anyone can be a victim of intimate partner violence. And that's just why it's important to use the term intimate partner violence versus domestic violence, because we don't want to put somebody in a category without, even though we might not be intentionally doing that. So intimate partner violence is just a good key term to use moving forward. Great. Like I said, we're going to keep on using Mentimeter. So go ahead and keep that out. And we've got another question for you. So we're going to turn from intimate partner violence to sexual violence now, just so you know there's a little shift happening. But are victims of sexual assault more likely to be assaulted by a stranger or someone they know? What do you think? And it's okay to guess, because we're going to learn the answer in a couple slides. All right, it looks like someone they know. I don't think I have to do much education, which is great. I'm glad you are all aware of that, and that's the correct answer. Oh, before we continue on, I just want to put out a little content warning that the next slide consists of pretty graphic words that encompass what sexual assault entails. So this can be sensitive information for many individuals. So please feel free to exit the screen or turn off your camera or walk. And again, just a reminder that our 24-hour hotline is in the corner of the screen. So while talking about these issues is not something that's comfortable and not something that's fun by any means, it's really important for us to understand what these terms mean when we're talking about them. When I say sexual violence, I'm also referring to sexual assault as well. And oftentimes people believe that sexual violence is just another term to reference rape. And while this is true, sexual assault also includes other forms of unwanted sexual touching and gestures. And this is not an exhaustive list, but underneath the umbrella is just some terms that fall under this category. And with COVID kickstarting really our virtual worlds, we need to start having conversations about different forms of sexual violence that we haven't in the past that involve these virtual spaces. So this can include things such as unwanted sexting or sending explicit photos to one person without their consent. And it can also be the other way around, being pressured or coerced into sending explicit photos of yourself to other individuals. Along these lines, we also have something known as revenge porn, where an individual may have consensually gotten explicit photos from an individual, but then without their consent, sends these photos to friends or posts them online as a way of getting back at the person. And it's completely awful and is never justified. But the reason why I bring this up is actually because the mayor of Cambridge, or a mayor in Cambridge County in Maryland, was recently arrested for sending approximately 500 photos of revenge porn on a social media platform called Reddit. And they were all photos of his ex-girlfriend. So this is something that is happening often. So it's really important to just know what it is and know that it's not okay. And then oftentimes sexual violence and intimate partner violence do co-occur. There's this long-standing myth that if you are in a relationship, you can't be sexually assaulted, that a marriage certificate or saying yes to being in a relationship means you are saying yes to any sex that comes thereafter. However, everyone in a relationship should have the capability to refuse sex when they do not want to engage. But unfortunately, as your answers to the last question show, we know this isn't the case. And over 45% of female rape victims and 29% of male rape victims were in a relationship with the perpetrator at the time of the sexual assaults. And in about 70% of assault cases, the survivor knows the perpetrator in some way, as they are a friend, a loved one, a family member, or an acquaintance. And then to take things even further, in the state of Maryland, some forms of marital rape are still legal. So this just shows that there's a lot of education that needs to be done around these issues, not only to our community, but to the politicians who are putting these laws in place. And that these laws don't always reflect compassion to or support survivors in the best way. Before we move on, is there any questions? No, okay. I appreciate you sticking with me. I know this is a heavy slide and a heavy topic. Okay, so now that we know more so about intimate partner violence, about sexual assault, now we're going to talk about why the holidays may be a sensitive time for survivors. Like we just talked about, abusers are rarely strangers, whether that be intimate partner violence or sexual violence. And therefore, survivors are most likely going to be around their abusers in some form during the holidays. And this can bring a lot of memories of trauma that they've endured in the forefront or put them in dangerous situations. There may also be pressure to be with family during the holidays. And a question I have for the audience, so feel free to put the answer in the chat or take yourself off of mute, is when you think of the typical holiday celebration, what comes to mind? I know some people said what they were excited for in the holidays in the chat. We can even go off of that as well. I'm seeing they associate the word cheer with the holidays and family, getting along for the sake of getting along. Nikki said in her family of origin, holidays were intense, sometimes lots of anger and disappointment. Thank you for sharing that, Nikki. I appreciate that. Mainly good times, sometimes awkward. Families being together, music, laughter, hidden arguments. It's a great point, Allie. Thank you. Mhm. Yes, these are all fantastic answers. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. And I think, kind of a theme that we're seeing here is this family being together. Maybe there's arguments, maybe people are getting angry, but it's being hidden in some form, right? And I think there's this story that we present not only in our head, but in our culture in general that's kind of created for us, that during the holidays, we're supposed to have this perfect family time, and we have to have these elaborate meals, and we have to, have that photo of us by the Christmas tree or the fireplace, all smiling with matching pajamas, right? And this can cause indirect pressure for many survivors to feel like they need to spend time with their families during the holidays, maybe if they don't want to. It may also be the case that survivors actually do want to spend time with their families during the holidays. And if you're a supporter, it's our job to empower survivors to do what they want, just make sure that they are doing what they want safely. So we're going to talk later on about how to make a physical safety plan or physical safety planning ideas. And maybe that's something to bring up with survivors if you know that they're going to be home and possibly in a dangerous situation. And to bring it back to Harley House, we rarely have a full shelter during the holidays. And again, this may be because survivors feel indirect pressure to be home with families, or they genuinely want to be. But then on the other side of the coin, there may be direct pressure from other family members saying things like, your kids need to spend time with family during the holidays. And abusers of intimate partner violence may even use this as a manipulation tactic, saying, you're a bad parent if you don't come home for the holidays, or I don't want my family to know we're in a bad place, so you have to come home to make it appear as though we are okay. And then there are also other added forms of stress, right? I mean, raise your hand if the holidays are a stressful time for you. I mean, we're talking about like Halloween all the way to New Year's Eve. Like, is it just stress filled? Yes, exactly. I wish it wasn't. Excuse me. Give me a second. Again, I wish it wasn't, but there's a lot of things that, we are told has to get done during this time. And that can be stressful for anyone, let alone when we have all of these other factors that survivors may be facing. And then research tells us that stress, especially financial stress, can heighten abuse in the home. So we're talking about intimate partner violence here. And when we think about the holidays, we know there's heightened securities as fish's dinner. And it's like we have all these different types of fish that we're supposed to cook on Christmas Eve, but it's really expensive. So just take that. I mean, even thinking about turkeys are expensive, whatever it may be, that can also cause a lot of stress for an individual. And then when we're thinking about COVID, we got to keep that in mind as well, that COVID has affected all of us. However, it has not affected us in the same way, right? It's affected all of us, but not necessarily in the same way. And COVID continues to wreak havoc on our most vulnerable communities by causing less financial stability, raising housing and food insecurity. And this can combine to make rates of violence higher in the home, right? So there's this stress that just keeps getting stacked on each other. And that's why it might be even more of a sensitive time for survivors. And then just moving on, privacy might be really difficult to find. If you've got family running in and out of the house, it may be really difficult to catch a breath by yourself. And if a survivor can't find a time to feel like they can reach out to their social support or even reach out to Harley House, Harley House's hotline, then that may be even more anxiety provoking for them. They may not be able to reach out to their social support system. So if you are a supporter, just thinking about that, how can you have a conversation with the survivors in your life to make sure that they are emotionally okay to the best of your ability, right? Maybe it's them texting you a code word like banana to let you know that they're not having a good time, they're having a difficult time. And then maybe you can text back a really appreciative text saying, I really appreciate you as a friend. I'm really sorry you're going through this. Like, I'm here when and if you can talk, right? But having these conversations with the survivor before they get into that situation. And then oftentimes survivors may be reliving trauma, right? So another question for you guys, have you ever dreaded an upcoming event? And how did you feel leading up to this event? Maybe you really didn't want to go, but you were pressured into going. How did you feel? Again, take yourself off or put it in the chat box. So much stress, anxiety, grouchiness. Yes, thank you. Incredibly anxious, hoping to get out. Dread, where there's large crowds, so much talking. It may be just exhausting. Great. Again, thank you for answering. I appreciate that. So the same feelings that come up when you're dreading going to an event may be the same feelings that survivors feel about the holidays, right? Because again, they might be having to be around or near their abusers. So this dread or this anxiety feeling come up. And this can look like having a go, staying asleep. This can look like aggravation, like Jen said. This can look like being on edge and like really jumpy. It can look like having a difficult time eating or just being really overwhelmed. So as a supporter, just knowing that and just being there for the survivor and meeting them where they're at, right? And that's kind of where trauma-informed care and trauma-informed support comes in. Knowing ahead of time, okay, this is what a survivor may be feeling, so I need to give them some grace and some space in order to make them feel like they can still come to me and I'm not going to judge. And lastly, increased alcohol use. So research shows that alcohol use increases both intimate partner violence and sexual violence. And while alcohol is never it does lower inhibitions and creates a sense of entitlement in perpetrators so that they may think, oh, well, it's okay if I abuse more. And it never is. Throughout the year is the day before Thanksgiving. There's a lot of people going out to bars, a lot of people drinking. So just again, knowing that now that we talked about time for survivors, and by the way, that is not an exhaustive list. Maybe reasons, and it's so individual to a survivor, but those are just some points to touch upon. But anyway, this is what survivors do for self-care. And by self-care, I mean taking proactive steps to feel physically and emotionally healthy and comfortable. And again, relaxed. And that's just something that survivors and supporters, great, thank you, that survivors and supporters can do in the moment. Another thing that I think is important to mention is limiting social media. We talked about indirect pressure, right? That society kind of as though we have to have the perfect family and the perfect holiday and every. Okay, anyway, I got distracted. But I think social media can play a large part in that indirect pressure that people feel to kind of keep up with the Joneses, right? So social media time really beneficial to a lot of people. And then lastly, if possible, just recognizing triggers. And by that, I mean recognizing when trauma symptoms occur or when somebody is feeling completely overwhelmed. Because the more easily someone can recognize what overwhelms them, the more easily they can prepare for those times. And I'm not saying prepare for everything, because unfortunately that's not the case, but it can help with that anxiety and that overwhelming feeling. And then lastly, sometimes trauma reactions are too strong and self-care does not work, and that is completely okay. It doesn't mean that you or a survivor has done anything wrong. These are very difficult circumstances, and trauma reactions are very normal reactions to
Change the conversation. We're going to direct the conversation a bit more towards safety planning. So, how do we take proactive measures to support the survivors in our lives and in our circles? So safety planning in essence is just, using proactive steps to ensure the safety of an individual who might be in a potentially dangerous situation. Safety planning truly is one of the best tools to provide to a survivor to help them through, especially those who are still experiencing their abuse. As we learned, so many survivors make the decision to go home for the holidays for a variety of reasons. So safety planning is really kind of that happy medium of respecting that decision, for them to go home, while also making sure that there's a level of protection for them. Granted, these are not end all be alls, but they are a great way to kind of mitigate some risk. So these are just a few tips that we like to provide to survivors who might be in danger physically. Physical violence looks different in every relationship, but these are just some good, more overall safety planning tips. So this person knows their situation better than anyone. They're living it. They have lived it. They know the triggers. They know what happens. It's their life. So trusting them to follow their own instincts and empowering that person to follow their own instincts is a great first step. A lot of people don't, always recognize the severity of their situation until, either they left or, it just kind of dawns on them one day. So, empowering them to make their own decisions and following their gut is probably not something that they're entirely used to at that point. So, affirming that, empowering them to use that decision-making ability that they have, and making sure that they know, hey, when I'm feeling like this is a dangerous situation and I need to be proactive about it, they'll do it. And they'll feel more comfortable doing that. Next is having a code word. Caroline mentioned this before, and this is such a handy thing. A lot of people will have code words for, please call 911 for me. Please just give me a call. There can be different code words for different scenarios. And using that code word, especially if there are children, having the kids know that code word too, so that maybe they can go up to a family member or a friend and say, hey, my mom asked me to pick up a cup of sugar or something like that. And then that family member will know, oh, okay, I need to go help this person, or something like that. It's just a very good way to kind of, not say anything directly about still getting the help that they need. Another huge one is, most of us are very good about this, but having a phone on them and charged at all times. This is just imperative, truly. If they need to make a quick exit, if they need to communicate with someone, if they need to call 911, that's really the best way to do it. Again, not everyone's phone is secure. So if they have a phone, maybe that they could, or they have a point of contact, a family member whose phone that they could borrow that is safer and more secure, that's always a great idea to share as well. Another tip is to prepare a go bag. So what I mean by a go bag is just like a backpack or like a small bag with essentials, a little bit of petty cash, credit cards, medication, toothbrush, toothpaste, a change of clothes, just base needs, and have one for the children or, pets, whomever also needs to leave if that person needs to leave. And preparing around having a to-go bag, where is it being stored? Is there somewhere that they can put it in their house that wouldn't go noticed? Is there a friend or a neighbor who can hold that for them? If they are putting it in their car, have them, put it in a place, maybe in their trunk where the wheel well is or something like that. So really having an in-depth conversation around how to keep that bag safe. So if they do, God forbid, need it, they have it and it's there. This is also very important, especially around the holidays. There's a lot of things that people do to, save face. We don't want to feel like, we're imposing our problems on family members or, being the downer in the holidays, that kind of thing. But in a situation like this, empower that survivor to tell as many people as they feel comfortable with. I'm saying like close family members, close friends, their coworkers, if they feel safe doing that. Just as many people as they feel comfortable with, because the more people that they know, the more people that will support them, have their back, but also the more people who will know that something is wrong, and the more people who can intervene if something goes awry. Again, the support network of telling people is different from person to person. They might have a large family that they can't really talk to, or there's, members of the family that they're worried might blab to other family members, that kind of thing. So, having that conversation of just like, who do you inherently trust to not tell anyone? And so this wouldn't get back to, their spouse or their partner or whomever. And lastly, just making sure that they have either our hotline number or, their local agency's hotline number. And if they can't keep it on their person, or if they can't have that number in their phone, have it for them. Maybe that's a code word, hey, can you call this hotline for me right now? And I'll connect with them. Or, can you send that to me in this version? And just kind of, having a conversation around that too. It's really imperative that when you're making a safety plan, it is a personal safety plan for that person. Again, every situation is different. Every relationship is different. So also having the conversation of like, what happens if their partner finds out, that they have a safety plan. All of these kinds of things need to be prepared for. And, that's a big ask for supporters. But, if the end is keeping that person safe, then that's really the best outcome. So again, that was more of the physical safety planning side. I next want to talk about the emotional safety planning. So this is, again, just really a great tool for someone who's experiencing trauma after, or post-traumatic stress, or is having overwhelming feelings and emotions come up after they maybe had an experience that was traumatic for them, or they just feel some general anxiety, or feeling very overwhelmed, which often happens around the holidays, like Caroline had mentioned earlier. So remember, unless you are a licensed therapist, you are not their therapist. You're not a doctor. You're not going to fix them. But these are some great tools to pass on just to get them through that crisis moment. First is just, researching grounding techniques with them, seeing what they like, see what feels comfortable to them. These are not, super involved or anything like that. It could just be deep breathing. It could be name 5 things that you can see, name 4 things that you can smell, name 3 things that you can touch, so forth. That's a really handy one. It's called the 5 senses. I think it's called the 5 senses grounding technique, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grounding technique. Another one is just grabbing a glass of water and having them focus on how it feels in their hand, the temperature, the weight, the noise that ice cubes are making, just having them focus on one very small thing so that they can, just retract their thoughts. Having that person to have a go-to self-care plan, what is comfortable for them, what's doable for them, what is something that they need help with, is there a code word for, hey, I need to enact my self-care plan right now, can you come help me? Or does that look like, hey, I'm going to text you this code word and I'm going to step out of the room for 5 minutes and just don't let anyone bother me? And again, that's also identifying and mobilizing their network of support. Who are these people who can help me take care of myself when I'm in this moment of crisis, or I'm in this moment of panic? Again, another thing that's really handy is, if they're traveling out of their comfort zone or out of their home, bringing clothing or an item that comforts them, whether that's their favorite shirt, a blanket, a scarf, a teddy bear, a candle, whatever, something that just reminds them of a calm and loving place and a place that they feel comfortable in. I have this red flannel shirt that I wear everywhere because it is my comfort shirt. So if I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed, I could put it on, I feel better. It's one of those things, it just helps. And, they don't have to have a self-care plan. Part of emotional support, safety planning can be helping them make one. So just asking them just basic questions like, what do you do when you feel stressed? What's a favorite food that you like to eat? What's a smell that makes you feel, more calm? What's your favorite blanket? Do you have a favorite pair of slippers, or do you like wearing socks, or, what's your favorite thing to look at outside? It can be so simple. But just, helping them think about things that bring them comfort and bring them, just a little bit of relaxation. And, if they are able to, have them practice their self-care plan, maybe in a place that feels safe and comfortable to them, so then they can remind themselves and visualize that place. I used to work on our crisis hotline, and one of the things that I would help clients with sometimes was visualization. This was a technique that they had learned with their counselor that they kind of walked me through, and she walked me through it, and she told me what she needed to do, and we just talked about it. So, if that's a technique that they've used with a professional and they want to bring it to you, just help them guide through that conversation. Imagery and just visualization can be really healing. So these are just a couple ideas. Does anyone have any questions about either the physical safety planning or the emotional safety planning? All right, so I'm going to keep going. So these are just some general guidelines when we're thinking about supporting survivors. Again, not everyone is the same, obviously, but just remember there's some very cardinal rules of just being a supportive person. Being a safe place is a huge one. Establishing trust. Have a relationship with that person, making sure that they feel like you care for them, that you are always going to be there for them within limits. We always have to remember our own limitations. Um, Encourage them to do what feels safe for them. And if that isn't always talking to you, or if it's not always talking to another person, respect that decision. At Harley House, we work on the empowerment model, which means we always respect the decisions that our clients come to. We never force anyone to do anything outside of their comfort zone, nor do we ever make it make a decision for them. So, it's really just encouraging someone to do what feels best for them in the moment because they know their situation best. And with all of this being said, we have to remember our own limitations. Like I said before, we're not professionals. We are not, their therapist. We're not their doctor. We cannot fix this situation for them, but we can help them in their journey along, whatever that looks like for them, whatever their end game is. So, realizing our role, remembering our own limitations. It's okay if you need a break too. Just communicate clearly, be like, hey, I'm having a little bit of a hard day. Do you mind if you ask someone else for help today? Or how about we just kind of, baseline it right now? I just need to go spend some time for myself. It's okay to need time for yourself. Educate yourself. Coming to programs like this is a great first step. Knowing your local resources, whether that is Harley House or another county organization, or even if you're in another state, just look up what your local your crisis center is, find their number, keep it in the back of your mind, do some research on your own with safety planning. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, it's just the hotline.org, has some great interactive safety planning activities on their website that you can do. And that's a great way to jumpstart those safety planning conversations. If that's ever something that is interesting to that survivor, or if it's safe to do. And again, knowing when and if it's appropriate to involve outside authorities. There are some groups that, that might not be appropriate for the survivor, might not want that interference. Again, it's just empowering them to make that decision for themselves and then respecting that decision. And lastly, being consistent and supportive. So respecting their autonomy. Again, it just comes back to that empowerment model, respecting that they are, making their own decisions that feel best for them and safest and most doable for them in that moment. Withhold your judgment. The last thing a survivor needs is to feel more judged. Again, it sounds like an easy concept, but we all have our internal biases. We always have our thoughts about how things should be and how things look, but we're an outsider in that relationship. So we need to remember that they're the ones living it and we just need to stand by them. And offer unconditional support. I should put an asterisk there because no one should be able to offer unconditional support because we're human. So, offer support as it relates to you and how it feels best for you. So taking time to recognize our own needs, because supporting someone going through a trauma can be extremely difficult. And it's okay that we take time for ourselves while we're in that supporting environment. And next, I want to kind of go further into that idea. So there is this term. Oh, I forgot this slide. I'm so sorry. So just remembering, our limits in the situation. You're not their therapist. You're their support system. And remember, we are always there. We do not just help direct survivors. We also provide support to secondary survivors. So anyone who is assisting a person going through trauma, you are able to call us and get supportive services. You can call us and just talk through a situation. You can get support. We are free and confidential. And even if you aren't in Frederick County, you can call us and we can connect you to whoever we're able to. And, we can provide you support, resources, education, whatever you need. So just remember, we're here for you too. All right. So again, wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that, feeling other people's trauma and the effects of that. So there's a term called vicarious trauma. And this is not to be confused with burnout. These are two different things. So vicarious trauma is really the weight of the other person's trauma after hearing their stories and supporting them. It can take a huge emotional toll on the other person, and it can be really, really overwhelming. People need other people, but it can often be extremely difficult to care for someone going through such a severe experience. So, it's really important to recognize when emotions start to become really overwhelming. You might be losing sleep, you might have changes in your eating patterns, you might have newly developed depression or anxiety. Again, if these things already existed, if they look different, if you just have some behavior changes, that kind of thing, these could all be signs that you are experiencing vicarious trauma. So vicarious trauma really is just witnessing other people's trauma and how it affects you. And it's a very real thing. And we just have to remember it's okay to set our boundaries. Everyone's different. Everyone's boundaries are different. And that's okay. It's okay and it's good to take time for ourselves. We're just people. I talked about having a self-care plan before. Make your own too. Self-care plans are great for anyone, no matter what they're going through or what they're experiencing. And again, just remember your limits. Remember it's okay to set boundaries. And remember, we are here for you too. Our hotline is open to anyone, anytime. Again, if you're not in Frederick County, we can always connect you to the appropriate agency, but we're here at all times. So now that we kind of have this understanding of vicarious trauma, there is a video that we are going to show. It's going to jump a couple minutes in, but it is a great video if you are interested in watching the whole thing. I believe it's called Drowning in Empathy. It's a TED Talk. We found it on YouTube. And this speaker just really talks about the difference between compassion fatigue, which is another word for vicarious trauma, and burnout. So we're going to watch two separate little snippets of the clip. But before we kind of jump into the video, has anyone heard the term before I just said it? Like, has anyone heard of vicarious trauma? Has anyone heard of burnout? Yeah. You can raise your hand, chat. Yep. Thanks, Caroline. Nikki. Yeah, awesome. So, I mean, it's not a very foreign term. Oh, sorry. But, yes, Joe, thank you. She's going to talk a lot about the difference between compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout. So, oh, Joe, I'm so sorry. And thank you, Caroline. She linked to the video that you can watch later. I really recommend it. We actually use it in our training for hotline so that we can, understand the warning signs. And it's a great video. So let's jump on in. All right. And again, this is going to jump to a couple minutes into the presentation.
Puts you at a greater risk for compassion fatigue is empathy. Those generally in a helping profession have a very strong empathetic response system. And empathy is that ability to pick yourself up and put yourself in someone else's shoes and get it. Really get where they're coming from. The problem with empathy is you don't get to decide when to jump out. And those traumas that they experience begin to change you. I remember when I was the supervisor of a therapeutic group home and I was sitting down with one of my clients. She began to tell me the horrific and painful stories of her past. And as she laid out in detail what she had experienced, my cell phone began to vibrate. And I wanted to show her that I was listening and I cared about every word she said. So I picked it up and I silenced it and I put it back down and I continued to listen. From that day forward, every single time I picked up my cell phone, swiped to silence it, I was transported back to her trauma. My brain had created a PTSD related symptom that transported me back to her situation every single time for years. Now, this would be pretty normal if it happened that day after work at the grocery store, or maybe even a week or 2 weeks later. But where we get concerned that maybe this trauma is starting to change you is when it's sticking around for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and maybe even longer. Now, for many years, compassion fatigue was confused. People called everything burnout until Dr. Charles Figley came around in the late 80s and 90s and began to do research. We called it burnout. But the truth is, there's a significant difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. Burnout has to do with being worn out, tired, and just flat out not liking your job anymore. Compassion fatigue has to do with being afraid. Compassion fatigue begins to change your hardwiring, change who you are. We see this a lot in child protective service workers. They start to become overly vigilant, believing that everyone is out to hurt them and their family. When I think of this, I can't help but think of the nurse who came after one of my classes and said, still to this day, she can see the broken bones of the young man who was abused by his parents. That still today, she knows.
So I'm going to stop the first clip right there. So I think she just did the greatest job explaining the difference. So with her distinction between burnout and compassion fatigue, have we heard in our lives, people confusing those terms or maybe using the word burnout in an incorrect way when maybe they meant it as a more severe term or something? Yeah, absolutely. In the social work field, I think this is very common in a lot of helping professions. There's not really the awareness that this type of experience exists, and they don't want to seem like they're, failing at their job or anything like that. But it's really not that. It's just really the emotional residue of dealing with the situations that they see on a day-to-day basis. Absolutely.
Holly, we were at it was another organization, it doesn't matter which one, but it was another organization in town that works with very vulnerable populations. And I was very surprised that their staff had not had training in this, but I'm like, well, it makes sense because most people don't get training in this, but they are in that same kind of situation where they're hearing and seeing like just intense trauma and they don't really have a way to process it. So I think it's very common, and especially among people who are in helping professions. And I think not enough people know about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Aggie says they had not heard the term vicarious trauma, but it's helpful to learn. Yeah, absolutely. I really think that this just comes down to, lack of the language. Vicarious trauma is also a newer term to me. I learned this as I was coming into this field. I had no idea what it was before, so I would have probably used the term burnout too. And then I started to recognize when I was working on our hotline, that I was experiencing signs of vicarious trauma. So, what I did for myself was I just made a self-care plan. I set boundaries as much as I could. And I made sure that once I left work, once I left that environment, it was completely, something, it was a work, you had to kind of separate yourself. Granted, that doesn't work for everyone. And I still deal with those feelings from time to time. Oh, Joe, I'm so sorry to hear that you experienced this. I hope that you are able to take care of yourself and find some care plans that worked for you. Thank you for sharing that, though. So if everyone's comfortable, I'm going to jump ahead in this video and we're just going to watch a couple more minutes. So she talks a little bit about what to do before, during, and after compassion fatigue has set in. So I'm going to jump just a couple minutes. Joe, I'm glad to know that you have those tools in place. That's wonderful. Okay. Just make sure I have the right timestamp. Okay.
You do. Now that I have thoroughly depressed you, I want to give you some good news. That compassion fatigue can be identified, arrested, and treated at any time. That you can begin this journey for post-traumatic growth. That you can be better after trauma than you ever were before. And the best way I can think of putting this is when you think of an airplane, you know that the stewardess tells you where those exits are, and then they begin to tell you to please put your mask on you first before assisting other people. Now, every time I travel for vacation with my family, I show the stewardess that I'm listening. I get the cue card out of the backseat pocket and I give eye contact. I'm almost the only person on the plane listening. And I show if the plane went down, I could save the plane. I'm real intense about it. And yet it never fails. Every time they finish, they come over to me and they say, "Excuse me, if there were a change in cabin pressure, what would you do?" And I'm a little offended. I don't know why they asked me that. But you see, that flight attendant, they see something you don't. They see the carry-ons that I travel with. They see this. They do see me, and they see this. You see, that flight attendant knows that no matter how much I listen to her, that I will put their masks on them first before caring for myself. But you see, she also knows that no matter how much of a supermom I believe I am, that I cannot live without oxygen. And yet every single day we do the same thing. I put your mask on you, and your mask on you, and your mask on you. And I don't care for myself. But you see, we can only give what we have. We give out of who we are. And if I don't care for myself, I certainly cannot care for you. So I'm going to ask you to complete a piece of homework for me. And I'm going to ask that you please do this every single day for the rest of your life. I have big expectations. I'm going to ask that you take 10 minutes just for you, 10 minutes to put your mask on you first, 10 minutes to pray or meditate, to exercise or take a walk, but 10 minutes to care for you first. Take 10.
All right. Awesome. Does anyone have any thoughts or final feelings before we move on? I know I changed the slide, but I do want to just let that resonate for a moment. It's such a great video. I really recommend everyone go and watch the full thing. She is a great speaker, but also such an important message and really helpful to share that video with others. And thank you for Caroline for putting that link in the video in the chat box. Sorry.
Oh, of course. So now we're going to go through some scenarios and just talk through how we would help the specific survivor in the scenario. So for the first one, you're at your aunt and uncle's house to have Thanksgiving dinner with your family. You notice your cousin Alex is acting very different. Alex is usually the life of the party, but today you notice he is quiet and staying by himself. You saw on social media that he went out with his friends to some bars last night. You approach Alex to ask if he's okay, and he tells you that someone drugged him and that he has no memory of last night. What can you do to support Alex? And I know we haven't used it in a second, but go ahead and bring up that Mentimeter bar back up because we're going to use that to answer the scenario. So, sorry, Allie, can you forward? Yes, thank you. You might have to press next until you get to this slide. Just keep pressing next and it'll pop up. All right. I'm so glad we're getting such good results on here. So let's see. Give him the a hotline number, maybe ours. Again, if Alex lived in Frederick County, we could help him by giving him counseling services if he would need it, maybe medical accompaniment if he wanted to go to the hospital and get an examination to see, if he was okay or to kind of determine what had happened the night before. If he was out of county, we could give him resources for that county. Sit with him so he can talk through how he's feeling and offer support. Wonderful. Remind him no matter what happened, it's not his fault. Fantastic. So we're saying no judgment whatsoever. Start by asking if he'd like me to listen, to help, or just need someone to listen to. I would not shame him. These are all amazing, amazing answers. And just another couple things to point out. I mean, all of these answers are fantastic, but if Alex felt like, he was sexually assaulted and wanted to get what's called a safe exam, you could offer to go with him. By safe exam, I mean a sexual assault forensic examination where trauma-informed nurses would take medical evidence of Alex and use that in a case if he wanted to pursue a court case. But in any safe exam, you can submit it anonymously, so you don't have to put your name towards anything, but it might be good just to have just in case. And they can also do free STD testing and pregnancy testing if it's applicable. But yeah, wonderful answers. Thank you.
So moving on to our next scenario. This one is, this year your family is hosting your extended family for dinner to celebrate the first night of Hanukkah. You notice that your Aunt Sharon is acting strangely around her husband, Ben. You overhear Ben making rude remarks to Sharon, and you even hear Ben threaten Sharon if she doesn't start acting like she's happy to be there. How could you intervene? I'll give everyone a second to read it. Feel free to type in your answers. These are great so far. So I always like to say that context is everything in these situations. And, if you have a relationship with Sharon, obviously this is a great opportunity to try and get her alone privately, if that's possible. If not, maybe check in with her later in the day or at another time. But everyone's saying check in with her, ask her if she feels okay or if she feels safe. Give her the hotline number if this is a normal behavior, absolutely. Ask her if she needs help. Ask her if it's just a normal behavior to begin with. It's not an excuse, but people do have bad days sometimes, and sometimes we say things that we don't mean. But if this is a normal behavior for Ben, then this could be a huge red flag that something else is going on. Again, it's not okay that someone says mean things to their partner or their spouse or whomever, but again, context is everything. I would even go so far to say, as if, little devil's advocate here, if you do have a good relationship with Ben, maybe calling him out in a joking way, like, why would you say something like that, dude? Or maybe check in with him privately and say, hey, that was weird. Like, are you okay? Again, context is everything. Aggie's said, I was going to ask about that. Really, it depends on the situation and the environment. If it feels like a safe thing to do, that wouldn't inherently put anyone in a precarious position. Usually at these events, it's mainly friends and family. So it's people that you probably know pretty well. If Ben is a closer relative. So yeah, it really just depends on like your personal relationship with him. Like if that's a conversation that you felt like would be okay to have, or maybe like telling if let's say Ben is your uncle on your dad's side, maybe talking to your dad, be like, hey, I saw Ben do this. Like it just felt kind of weird. Maybe you should check in with him. So maybe like redirecting the responsibility to someone else who might have like a better relationship. Again, it really is the context of just, what the relationship is like, studying the body language. Is Sharon looking very uncomfortable? Is she looking afraid? Or is she just like kind of blowing it off and like acting like, it's a normal thing? Again, if this is normal, then, or if it's abnormal, that could just mean that he's having a bad day. Again, not an excuse to be mean, but if it's not, talking to her aside, talking to him aside, making sure that they just are, talking to somebody about why this behavior is happening, and making sure that Sharon just feels supported and protected in that moment by giving her, a hotline number if it's safe to do so. If it's not safe to do so, maybe telling her to check in with you later about, maybe she brought a dish and she needs to have it returned to her or something like that. Just like kind of make an excuse to see her later on is always a good idea. But again, situations are different. So these are just some great ideas. Aggie, does that answer your question? I just want to make sure we don't skip over it. Wonderful. All right, I will move on to the next one.
Okay, so your sister Amy, who lives out of town, is coming home for Christmas and bringing her new girlfriend Maya. When Amy arrives, you notice she has some odd marks on her arms and legs. Over the next few days, you overhear Maya shouting at Amy. But then when they are with everyone, they both act as if nothing is wrong. You eventually get a chance to speak with Amy alone, and she tells you that she is afraid of Maya. How can you help Amy? Help her create a safety plan. That's wonderful. Yes. Mhm. I guess if somebody wants to piggyback off of that, what could be in the safety plan? Calling the local hotline with her. That's a really great one. Plan it maybe, you know, Amy planning with her family, asking Maya to leave, but then also I think creating a plan of, okay, what's going to happen when Amy goes back home, wherever she may be? Like, where does she live in terms of where Maya lives? Does Maya, have a key to Amy's house or apartment? Does she have close access to, Amy's belongings? Just again, talking through those minute details of what's going on and then creating a plan to keep Amy physically safe. But yeah, those are all great points.
Okay, so that was the last scenario. We do want to just share a list of resources with all of you. These are great to just have. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see our hotline number as well as our website, and then below it, the National Domestic Violence Hotline and their website, and then the hotline for RAIN. And that is the national hotline for victims of rape, incest, abuse, and other types of sexual violence. All three have great websites. The hotline.org is the one that I mentioned earlier about the interactive safety plans. They're just really, really helpful. They're super in-depth and very, it can be very personalized. They're a great, great tool. On the right-hand side, we just have some more online resources. Love is Respect and the One Love Foundation are very much geared towards like young adults, college-age students, teens, that kind of population. And they have some great information about healthy relationships, green flags versus red flags, that kind of stuff. So, take these down. We have these list of resources on our website as well. So feel free to just peruse that as well. And feel free to pass these on to the survivors in your life or just anyone to educate further. But yeah, just a couple great resources. And again, if you ever want to do your own research, there's so many great organizations out here. These are just a couple of our favorites. And lastly, if you have any further questions, we are able to contact us through our hotline, as well as our website, or if you want to email us directly, engage@Harley House is the best way to get in touch with us. But we are also happy to stay on and talk if anyone has any concerns or questions that you'd like to speak with us privately about. Otherwise, thank you all so much for coming and being here with us tonight.